Hi, Midhul.
Hey,
Hi,
Joe.
Hey, how are you
can,
doing?
doing good. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yeah, loud
Awesome,
and clear.
awesome.
Yeah, thank you for join the meeting. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very happy that the paper is being discussed and looking forward to the presentation and discussion.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's a great paper. I really enjoyed reading it. Yeah. So, how's the Thanksgiving plan? It's next week, right?
Yeah, yes, I don't have anything planned specifically, but uh, it's getting
That's
pretty cold here.
oh yeah. That Isaac already has like the first snow or already multiple snows.
No snow yet, but the temperatures are
Okay.
starting to drop.
I see. I see. Yeah, Xiamen actually is in the southern part of China, so it's the temperature is dropping, but still pretty warm. I think it's like maybe 65 degrees. So yeah, that's one of the perks living in the southern part of the country.
Got it.
Yeah. So Matt, how about UIUC? So how is the wind very strong or you're doing okay over there?
I'm doing okay. It's starting to get a little bit colder. We've had kind of strange weather here. It's been kind of up in the 60s and then it kind of drops down a lot, kind of goes up and down. So yeah, it's kind of a mix.
I see, I see. Yeah, yeah, we are here. Yeah, us here too. Actually, I think we were like maybe 80 or even 85 degrees last week, and then there's some hurricane passing by, not directly, but passing by, so the temperature start to drop. But I
Hmm.
think probably over the weekend the temperature will go up again to maybe to 70 or 75.
Hmm.
So it's gonna be it looks like it's gonna be a very warm winter here. So nothing to complain here from my side. Yeah. So Matt, I saw your email regarding a paid Zoom account. So I think so far we are doing okay, right? So because you schedule this meeting using your user's professional account, so I think we're okay. We don't have to purchase a separate account
Recording in
just yet,
progress.
just to save a little bit
Recording
budget
stopped.
for the sake, right?
Yeah, sure. And that reminds me to make sure the recording starts at some point. So yeah,
Right, right.
yeah, sure,
Okay,
yeah.
definitely. So, are you seeing the? I think I heard two voice.
Yeah,
One saying the recording started, and then it said recording stopped. So, is it
yeah.
starting or stopped? I just want to make sure.
I think I got it. I paused it. Let me
Oh, I
think.
see.
Yeah. Like once we get
Uh,
going,
uh,
I can start, I guess. But
Perfect,
yeah.
perfect. So, just give me 1 second. I think I just need to
Yeah, you
briefly
know what?
adjust. Yeah.
I'm gonna make you a co-host too, I think. Then maybe you can
Oh,
start and stop it too.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let me. I think I'm gonna just take a screenshot for since all of us are here. I just want
Recording
to
in
take a.
progress.
Okay, cool. It's in progress, and I'm gonna take a screenshot, and then okay, we can start right on time. So so uh, welcome everyone. So I'm speaking not only to the participants on Zoom, but also on two separate Tencent meetings in China, because we in China students and the faculties sometimes have trouble accessing Zoom, so Tencent meeting is more accessible to them. So we have two Zoom meetings, one Zoom meeting, two Tencent meetings, and one streaming broadcasting on a website called Bilibili. So so this way, so this is our third meeting, third SIGCOMM Paper Reading Group meeting, and we're honored to select this wonderful paper, Understanding the Host Network. It's the best student paper award in SIGCOMM 24. And I think today the presenter will be one of my PhD student, Rulan. She will she will present the paper using probably 35 minutes. And then after that, we are honored to have invited Midhul, the first author of this paper. So how to pronounce your last name? Sorry about that. So Vuppalapati, is that correct?
Yeah,
Sorry.
it's yeah, it's a bit of a tongue twister. It's Vuppalapati, so you're very close.
Okay. Okay, Vuppalapati. Okay, got you. Yes, thank you. So so Midhul would join us with a discussion with some questions from the audience, and I think I also personally have some questions about the paper. So it's gonna be I think it's gonna be a very fun session today. So without further ado, I think Rulan, you can start your presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Everyone can see my screen, right?
Yes, we can see that.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Today I'm gonna introduce this paper, Understanding the Host Network. It's a joint work from Cornell University and UIUC and University of Washington. Okay. Distinct from more commonly discussed networks like the internet and or data center networks, today we will talk about the host network. The host network is an inter-network within a single host. And there are different devices in the host network, including CPUs, memory, and peripherals such as NICs and SSDs. And the host network integrates processor, memory, and peripheral interconnects to enable data transfer between these devices. There are two types of traffic in the host. One is CPU to memory traffic, which traverses processor memory interconnects generated from apps such as Redis and GraphX. And another is peripheral to memory traffic, which traverses peripheral memory interconnects generated from networked and storage apps such as Spark and MapReduce. These two types of traffic coexist and compete for shared host resources. Several studies from large-scale production data centers have demonstrated that the contention within the host network can result in significant throughput degradation, tail latency inflation, and isolation violation for networked applications. As the host network is becoming an increasingly prominent bottleneck, designing future network protocols, operating systems, and hardware requires an in-depth understanding of the various regimes and various contention regimes and the root causes of such contention within the host network. Thus, this paper well studied the host network. It builds an in-depth understanding of the various regimes and the root causes of such contention within the host network. Then exploring the host network from the lens of domain-by-domain credit-based flow control. Finally, it opens up many interesting avenues of future research by viewing host network as a standalone network. I will first introduce how this work characterizes the interplay of processor memory and peripheral interconnects within the host, reveal different regimes in terms of contention within the host network, and performance degradation for the both two apps. Prior work finds that the host network congestion could lead to P2M app performance degradation. There is an experiment from host CC which shows the P2M app performance suffers when co-located with a C2M app. They use MLC benchmark for memory app to generate C2M traffic, which is 4 long flows. And they use iPerf benchmark for NetApp-T to generate P2M traffic with 1-to-1 read-write ratio and a sequential memory access pattern. And the left result shows that the host congestion leads to significant performance degradation there in terms of packet drop rates and throughput, even when there is no network congestion. And the right result shows that the C2M traffic acquired relatively larger fraction of memory bandwidth, leaving little room for P2M traffic. However, this paper conducted more experiments and find a new phenomenon of contention within the host network, which is when C2M and P2M apps are co-located, C2M app performance degrades while P2M app performance is unaffected. We define the performance degradation as the ratio of isolated throughput to co-located throughput. And the C2M workload here is from Redis and GAPBS apps. Both of the two workloads are non-cache resident, memory-intensive workloads with a large number of random C2M memory reads. And the P2M workload is a representative storage workload from FIO, which is sequentially reads 8 MB request size. And after the experiment, we found that the Redis observes the throughput suffer from 1.25 to 1.32 times degradation. And the GAPBS app suffers the same high-level degradation, while FIO remain unaffected. And also, C2M app performance degrades even when memory bandwidth is far from saturated. Since the CPU resources are isolated, while the shared memory interconnect sum up totally around 60% of the theoretical maximum, and the utilization curve has no flattened out. Then we switch to using lightweight apps with easy control of memory access patterns to systematically study the host network contention. Since there are two sources of apps, and each of them has two types of traffics. This enables us to perform a deeper characterization of performance degradation trends and to study different combination of read and write for C2M and P2M apps. Such that the experiments will result in 4 quadrants, revealing different regimes in terms of contention within the host network, and also the performance degradation for both two apps. And we found 2 regimes here. The first regime referred to as the blue regime, captures a new phenomenon. C2M apps observe performance degradation, while P2M apps observe minimal or no performance degradation. And the other regime, referred to as the red regime, captures the phenomenon observed in previous study. P2M apps observe severe performance degradation, while C2M apps also observe significant performance degradation. If we looked at the memory bandwidth utilization of these experiments, we can find that the degradation of blue regime happens sometimes when memory bandwidth is far from saturated, and increasing load lead to worse C2M throughput and higher memory bandwidth utilization, while P2M traffic keeps a stable memory utilization. And in red regime, when using 2 or fewer C2M cores, C2M throughput degrades while P2M throughput remains unaffected. However, with 3 or more C2M cores, once memory bandwidth is saturated, C2M traffic starts to compete for memory bandwidth. At this point, we can see the phenomenon, causing more significant degradation in P2M throughput as the load increases. The new regimes leads us to question about the root cause of host network contention, which is the interplay between processor memory and the peripheral interconnects. And this paper presents a domain-by-domain credit-based flow control, a conceptual abstraction that captures the interplay between these devices within the host network. But before that, let me give a brief primer on the host network architecture and the data paths for C2M and P2M requests. This figure shows the host architecture, which consists of cores and the cache, and also the caching and home agent, and the integrated I/O controller and the memory controller. All of them connected by the on-chip processor interconnect. Peripheral devices are attached to the IIO through the peripheral interconnect, typically PCIe channel, and the DRAM consists of a set of module, and each of which is attached to the memory controller through a memory channel. And I first show the CPU to memory data path, which could cross blue 1, 2, 3, 4 1, 2, 3, 4 subpaths. I use the C2M read request as an example. Once the read request generated by cores upon a cache miss, the data path will go through the following data path. Upon an L1 cache miss, an entry is allocated in the core's LFB, and a request is sent to the L2 cache. Upon reaching the L2 cache, the cache line is either served from L2 cache upon a cache hit, or the request is sent to the CHA upon cache miss. And the CHA serves the cache line from the LLC if there is an LLC hit. Otherwise, the cache sends the request to the memory controller, where it is quit the read pending queue. The memory controller fetches the required cache line from DRAM over the memory channel and returns the data back to the core while populating the cache and ultimately freeing the corresponding LFB entry. And PWM traffic incurs the following data paths. Peripheral device initiates a DMA request to the IO that allocates an entry in the IIO buffer per cache line. And then IIO forwards the request to the CHA. And the CHA sends the request to the memory controller. And then the memory controller serves read requests in a manner similar to the C2M data path. After a read is served from the DRAM, the data is returned to the IIO, at which point the IIO buffer entry is cleared and the data is sent back to the peripheral device. And for writes, the IIO only needs to wait until the request is admitted to the read pending queue before freeing its buffer entry. Now we're back to introduce the domain-by-domain credit-based flow control. It generalized the two flow control mechanisms studied in classical computer networking community. On the one hand, end-to-end flow control. On the one hand, is end-to-end flow control mechanism, which use the entire path between a sender-receiver pair as a single domain. And on the other hand, it's a hop-by-hop credit-based flow control mechanism. For example, which used in ATM networks and PFC-enabled RDMA networks. It's a flow control over each hop along the path between the sender receiver and each domain uses an independent credit-based flow control mechanism. Specifically, the sender of each domain is assigned credits that are used to limit the number of in-flight requests that the sender can inject into the domain. And the sender consumes a credit to send one request. And this credit is replenished when request is acknowledged by the receiver of the domain. There shows an abstraction of host network. We view cores, peripheral devices, and DRAM as endpoints, and the intermediate components which have queues as network nodes. They are LFB, IIO, CHA, and memory controller. In this way, the host network can be logically decomposed into multiple domains, each of which is a sub-network of the host network. Each domain uses an independent credit-based flow control mechanism. For example, in P2M write domain, such as domain 2, the credits are IO buffer size and the memory buffer size is a credit of domain 3. And the bottleneck within the data path is a domain with a minimum throughput, such that and the end-to-end throughput is limited by the minimum throughput. This slide shows the domains within the host network for each of within the host network. For each of the C2M and P2M read and write data paths, the specific domain highlighted in color for each data path is the bottleneck domain. The domains and their characteristics depend on traffic source and type. Different requests traverse different domains in the host network. And the evidence used to find which node should be included in each domain comes from the careful measurements. For example, if we run a low load P2M write workload co-located with P2M write workload, we can observe that the IIO latency, the green bar, is always larger than the CHA to memory controller write latency, the green bar. And also finally we find that the inflation in IIO latency with increasing load near perfectly matches the inflation in CHA to MC write latency, which indicates that the IIO latency is inclusive of CHA to MC write latency. This provides evidence that P2M write domains include the MC, which is a Q4 node in this graph. Then we studied the core reason of application performance degradation based on the domain-by-domain credit-based flow control. We know that the throughput is determined by the number of credits and their latency. The core reason behind different network contention regimes are primarily the asymmetry in credits and latency across different domains. Next, we use C2M read and P2M read quadrant to explain the blue regime. We can see that there is a domain including CHA and MC for both P2M and C2M data paths. And the C2M throughput degrades because domain credits are fully utilized and domain latency increase. Even when the C2M workload is run in isolation, the corresponding domain credits are fully utilized, which is LFB credits, the Q1 node, the buffer in Q1 node. This is because each core can issue instructions fast enough to keep the LFB full. As a result, any non-zero increase in domain latency will result in the throughput degradation of C2M apps. Yet the C2M throughput doesn't degrade because there are enough domain credits available in IIO, which allows it to tolerate inflation in domain latency. And we analyze C2M right, P2M right quadrant to understand the radar regime. We observe two new trends in this quadrant. First, less than three C2M cores. We observe C2M app. We find that the C2M app degrades while the P2M didn't. This is sorry, less than three cores, we find that the P2M P2M performance suffers while C2M not. This is because back pressure from memory controller impacts P2M write domain, but not C2M write domain. Since memory controller is in the P2M write bottleneck domain, while isn't in C2M write bottleneck domain, leading to the throughput degradation for the former. When memory bandwidth is saturated, the memory controller write query gets filled up. That's leading to back pressure and causing a backlog of writes at the CHA. Interestingly, this is only impact the P2M workload, but not even though both P2M and C2M are performing writes. This is because the P2M write domain spans the memory controller while the C2M write domain doesn't. And therefore, back pressure from the memory controller results in domain latency inflation of the P2M. There shows explanation of two quadrants. For more detail, we can see the full paper for another two quadrant explanation. Viewing the host network as a standalone network can open up several interesting avenues of future research at the intersection of computer networking, operating systems, and the computer architecture. As technology trend for the host hardware suggests that the performance of peripheral interconnects is improving much more rapidly than processor and memory interconnects, which lead to an increasing imbalance of resources and contention within the host network. While the host network in modern data center service is becoming much more complicated, with new interconnects like CXL and NVLink, more complex topologies involving PCIe switches, different types of memory, and the introduction of new hardware accelerators and data movement engines. There's a lot going on. In the future, more research is needed to fully understand how these components interact within such complicated host network systems. Also, the protocol operating system may need to be re-architected to support complex host network, and also to support the host network resource allocation. So that's my presentation. Thanks for listening.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, let's thank Rulan for the presentation. It's a very interesting paper, but I think because I'm Rulan's advisor, so I know it's a little bit challenging for her to understand, because this really is not her area. So, but I think that's also why we run this reading group, right? So basically to broaden students' horizon and expertise. So basically, even though PhD students are supposed to be expert in one particular area, but students should try to read and learn more related ones. So you don't know whether this would inspire something, motivate some new research, right? So I would say that's great. So we already have a few questions in the chat channel. So Midhul, I will just read it loud so that our other audience can hear, and then you can answer it one by one. So the first question actually is from Matt. So Matt says, why aren't we using supercomputers? Because he said back in 1980s, we could architecture large-scale computers with a lot of thought about CPU interconnects. The network inside the computer essentially would be designed explicitly for high bandwidth. So is the industry now heading back towards architecting large-scale computers with direct connections between CPUs anyway, making this problem essentially go away? And he's wondering if you have any thoughts about this, and and if you have any thoughts about the relation of your fundings and to this kind of classic comparisons between classic and older supercomputer CPUs interconnect topologies.
Yeah, so I think very fascinating question, Matt. I actually saw the question on the chat, and I was, trying to Google some of the older supercomputers to try to see to learn more about the topologies. And I think so. I guess maybe let me. It looks like there are multiple parts to the question, so let me maybe try to say my thoughts first on: is the industry headed back towards architecting large-scale computers? So there are two instances that I can think of which sort of seem like which have this idea of trying to build, trying to vertically scale a server up to have larger number of cores, memories, and so on. And the first scenario I can think of is in the context of CXL, like CXL attached memory, where people are talking about, having these having multiple of these hosts or servers connected to like a common CXL memory controller, which can support cache coherent accesses from all of the CPUs. And so you can sort of think of this whole thing as one big computer, which has many cores that are able to communicate with each other in a cache coherent manner. That is one example I can think of where that is happening. But again, this is also like still at relatively small scale, like maybe at the rack scale or something like that. And it remains to be seen to what extent we can actually scale this. And the second thing I can think of is in the GPU context. And I will admit I know very little about this. I'm still learning about GPU architectures and topologies. But with all of these, NVIDIA DGX boxes and so on, I think that they're also sort of starting to look like some kind of a supercomputer where you have like a bunch of these nodes that are connected with very high bandwidth interconnects. So those are kind of the two scenarios I can think of. And I think regarding the point about whether these problems will go away, I don't think so. And let me say why, let me try to justify that a little bit more. Even if you imagine you had a supercomputer where you had large number of cores that were connected, say in the best case, like point to point using high bandwidth links, all to all high bandwidth links and so on. I think there's still going to be like heterogeneity in interconnects, in the sense that you have your processor interconnect, which is connecting the cores, but you will have to have a memory interconnect, for example, right? Because that is able to interface between the cores and the memory. And then I still think we would need a peripheral interconnect, because even though you may not require like NICs, for example, to connect the cores, but you still might want for storage through SSDs and stuff like that to be able to attach peripherals and access them, right? So I still think we will have these, even in such a supercomputer. It may be inevitable to have like some kind of multiple interconnects inside the supercomputer that are interacting with each other. And I think as this paper kind of shows, it's not just, these problems are not just coming because of bandwidth bottlenecks. It's not always the case that, bandwidth is, we do see many scenarios where these problems occur even when bandwidth is far from bottlenecked, right? And this is happening because of, the complex interplay between these interconnects, because of the flow control and things like that. So I think that these problems will not go away. If anything, they will become even more interesting, because in these kinds of larger computers, we will have even more hierarchies of interconnects and so on. So that is my thought, at least. And I'd love to hear any follow-up thoughts or questions.
So Matt, any thoughts you want to add on that, or you are happy with what Midhul just said, and you need to digest a little bit more?
I'm very happy. I thought the point about things kind of getting more interesting was actually a really good point. I think it'll be interesting to see kind of how heterogeneous kind of some of these upcoming compute platforms are, because it does seem like there's kind of benefits to making kind of heterogeneous platforms and kind of like non-uniform memory access sort of architectures. It seems like there could be cost savings and other reasons to do that, especially as things get kind of more distributed and kind of more in the wide area. But yeah, I thought that was a really great answer. Yeah, thank you.
Cool, wonderful. So now we move on to the second question from Adrian. Adrian's question is, what tools do you use to test and the whole all sides of this experiment? Like how do you pinpoint where in the system something is happening and measure the latency and etc.? So, I would imagine there are lots of tools involved in measuring this, right?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So and in fact, that was like probably the hardest, part of the project, trying to figure out how to, do this. Oh, I see. I just saw someone's message saying that they're going to be. Oh, that was the AI. Okay, never mind.
Oh, that's yeah. Not so intelligent.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that, so at least this particular paper, all the experiments we did in this paper were on top of Intel processors, and Intel processors, most recent generations have this very nice infrastructure that allows you to do very low-level measurements of what is happening inside the host network. So this infrastructure is called the Encore performance monitoring infrastructure. And the way it mostly works at a high level is that in many of these components or the nodes in the host network that Rulan was showing, there are a bunch of registers that the processor has, which can be used to measure various metrics. And you can program these registers in many different ways to say which metrics you want to measure, how do you want to aggregate these metrics. And the nice thing about this is all of these registers, the hardware, are updated at the hardware clock cycle granularity. So this is like extremely like sub-nanosecond scale granularity. So you're getting very accurate measurements, at least at the hardware level. And then you can sample these in the software at like pretty reasonable time scales, like to get, to basically be able to get low overhead measurement of these metrics. And so that is basically the infrastructure that we mostly rely on. And the way we measure latency is at these different points is in all of these cases, it turns out that you can apply Little's law to measure latency. And the way that works is that at any given node, when you have a queue or a buffer, if you have a way to measure the average occupancy of that queue or buffer, and what is the average rate at which requests are coming into that buffer, then you can use those two and apply Little's law to get the latency. So, and it's really nice because the processor actually provides these metrics for many of the different nodes within the host network. So you can do these latency, like very accurate latency measurements, and using that, we try to figure out. That is basically how we've reverse engineered these domains and the characteristics by using those measurements in some sense. So.
Yeah, I think Rulan just posted that essentially is that there's this Encore performance monitoring toolkit. Yeah. I think you're using, right? Okay.
Yeah, it's less of a toolkit. I would say it's a manual. It's a very short
manual
I see that.
Yeah.
Intel releases. and it also changes across process. They have one manual like for different generations, each for each generation, and so it takes a little bit of work to understand. Like you kind of have, in some cases, you have to. They give you like some description of what a particular counter or event is, and then you have to go back and think more about it and actually validate it, because you never know what it's not very precisely specified basically. So there's a lot of validation and measurement that you need to do to make this work. And I'll also add a note, maybe I can share this link, but we have all of the infrastructure that we built for the measurement is currently open source on our GitHub repo. So if anyone is interested in looking further, I think that would be a great place to look. And
Okay, cool. So I think Adrian is very happy. That great to know, right? So, okay, so now we move on to the third question. It's from Xu. I believe he or she is a student from Zhejiang University, China. So I think his question is that about the blue and red regimens in the experiment setup, and because he said because this experiment essentially used Cascade Lake CPU with only 2 memory channels, and that would essentially offer very limited memory bandwidth. But lazy CPU like Sapphire Rapids and Emirates Rapids offers like more than 8 memory channels per socket, and like AMD EPYC had even more, offer like 12 more, even more, right? So he's wondering if these findings and the conclusions are still applicable. Yeah, the findings in this paper would be applicable to this more advanced CPU with higher memory bandwidth, and would this the degree of performance degradation essentially would be smaller, or even in the extreme case gone, because IIO offered like more credits to hidden domain latency?
Yeah, so a very good question. So my answer to this is that I think the problems will get worse. Let me say why. So yes, the Cascade Lake server had 2 memory channels, right? But it's not just about the memory bandwidth, absolute value of the memory bandwidth, right? You need to look at all the different resources, and it's really the ratios of the resources that matter, right? So let me say more. In the Cascade Lake server, there are 2 memory channels that gives you roughly 50 gigabytes per second, maximum memory bandwidth, theoretical, and you have 8 cores, right, per socket, at least the setup that we were using. Now, if I were to look at an Intel Sapphire Rapids server, right? So actually before that, in the Cascade Lake server, so it's 50 gigabytes per second for eight cores. So it's roughly, I guess 50 by 8 would be roughly 6 gigabytes per second per core, right? If we look at a Sapphire Rapids server, I think, yes, it has eight memory channels. And I think if you do the math with the memory DDR5 and so on, it will give you roughly 300 gigabytes per second memory bandwidth. But the server also has more cores. It has, I think, up to 56 cores, right? So now if you look at the ratio, it's basically going to be like roughly 5 gigabytes. So basically it has gotten worse, right? So the memory bandwidth is even more oversubscribed in the Sapphire Rapids CPUs, if you look at the ratios. And from some of the numbers that I have, like for AMD CPU, it's much worse, because I think the AMD CPU might have like 8 or 12 channels, but it has like way more number of cores, like I think up to 128 or so on. So the ratio is like, I think like 2 to 3x worse than what we see on these CPUs. So in terms of bandwidth ratio, so this is on the CPU side. I think it applies roughly on the peripheral side also. Like the trends show that the PCI bandwidth, if you look at the aggregate PCI bandwidth that the server has, that is increasing at a faster rate than the rate at which the memory bandwidth is increasing. So I think even those ratios are going to get worse over time. And finally, I want to make the other point that even if you had, even if it was the case that you had a lot of bandwidth, one of the things that this work is showing is that it's not just about bandwidth, right? You might have like really high bandwidth, but you might still start seeing these latency inflations happening. And the reason is because, you have this, you can have load imbalances and things like that. And there is this whole interplay between the different interconnects where this latency inflation may cause, your credits to be used, and you might still see this problem, right? So I think that would be my overall answer.
Yeah. kind of reminds me about this congestion collapse in TCP back in 1980s, right? I guess.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. All right. So I think so far we well, other audience are thinking about the questions. I have maybe one. I have one questions regarding the concept of domain here. Right? So Rulan, you could go back to a few slides. I think there's one slide showing about different in different settings. Yeah, there are essentially different domains becomes the bottleneck, right, along the data path. So I guess my question would be here. I couldn't. I probably missed some details in the paper, but is this domain like manually defined or divided, or basically like you can define the domain by in different ways, but still by analyzing this by analyzing the data path and through on the experiment and the results, you can isolate the bottleneck domain from like a different combinations or different definitions of domain. So I guess this concept is a little bit unclear to me.
Got it. Yeah. So let me try to answer that. So I think the abstraction itself of domain by domain flow control, you're right, is general. Like for a general processor, you could have different. You could imagine having different domains for different kinds of traffic, and you could do similar analysis on that. But here, the way these domains were defined is the way we found these domains, that is based on the current architecture of the processor that we have, right? And this is not, the reason for the domains being the way they are is not arbitrary. So I think there is a deeper reason. So for example, we can look at reads, for example, right? So in the case of reads, you see these big domains that span many hops. And the reason for that is, if you think about it, when a read is being serviced, let's say from the LFB, like in the top left corner, when you allocate an entry in the LFB, it needs to remain queued at the LFB until the response comes back. And the reason for this is that if you look at these processor cores, when they're creating these multiple in-flight memory requests, and these can be processed out of order, right? So when a memory response comes back from the memory, the core needs to know what to do with that, right? Like which register should I put it in, and so on. So it needs to maintain some state, and the reason, in order to maintain that state, it needs to keep that entry allocated with some metadata saying that there is something going on there, right? And so that is one reason here. And then if you look at the write case, for example, right, C2M write, for example, for write, it's different because the core does not need to. There is no response, or the core is not waiting for any data to come back, right? So it can just send it and kind of forget about it intuitively, right? So I think domains are an artifact of, there are like request semantics and consistency requirements and so on within the processor architecture. And in order to maintain these the allocation and deallocation of buffers is determined, and that is what is leading to these domains. And so we arrived at these domains on our particular processor by doing these measurements and trying to figure out what the domains were. I think like if you look at other processors, I can totally imagine that we might see different kinds of domains, right? Because there may be different topologies, different kinds of optimizations that people are doing. But I hope that in the future we'll be able to extend this to other processors and try to figure out what the domains are there, and maybe hopefully the abstraction of the high level abstraction of domain by domain flow control will still apply. It's just that what the domains are and what the credits are will change.
Okay, I see. Yeah, I think I have a better understanding about that, and yeah, looks like yeah. But I keep like probably maybe just wishful thinking, and maybe if there could be a way like automatically deciding the partition of domains, that'd be or even semi-automatic way, right? That would make this the whole set of analysis and the experiment framework to be more robust, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. I think so. In the current infrastructure in the Git repo, it's like you still have to do a lot of manual, and it's very well, it's tuned to a particular architecture and stuff. But yeah, it would be great if we can build like a more automated infrastructure. I think it would be possible, and that would be fantastic. I think I totally agree with you.
Yeah. For students here, maybe just maybe, right? Maybe a research idea for you guys to look into. Okay. Yeah. So I need to hurry a little bit. So Adrian has another question. Quick question: is the congestion inside the host typically persistent or bursting?
Yeah. So I think the answer to this is it depends on the workload. So I don't have a very great answer to this, but one thing I can say is that congestion, or like, congestion inside the host can potentially vary at much finer grain time scale than congestion in the network, because in the network you're operating at, RTT scale, maybe 10 microseconds, few microseconds, but within the host, CPU to memory data path is like, less than 100 nanoseconds. So you could have significantly more variable congestion within the host. And I think that actually does point to a very interesting, leads to some very interesting technical challenges in terms of how to address this, some of which the CC paper from SIGCOMM 23 addresses to some extent, but I think there's a lot more to be done in that space.
Right. Yeah, and also just to add on that, and also Edward has just a tiny little bit. So I think the host congestion paper also read it. That's a fantastic one. And I think in one of the citations talking about there's a work done by Alibaba, and also I also participate in part of the work is in order to alleviate the host congestion, we essentially try to bypass memory, and basically we came up a better way to leverage DDIO to use a very small part of the last line cache to basically to recycling it based on Little's law, so that we can to basically bypass memory, so that we essentially in typical in like a storage workload which has a very short span a short span of time in memory, so that we can very effectively alleviate the host congestion, right? So yeah, so we basically this is only a small section in this experience paper. We have like archive papers unpublished, but yeah, but it's on archive. So for people who are interested, you can also try to read a little bit. But of course, the host congestion paper definitely is a must read for if you want to know more. Yeah. So okay, cool. And I think because we have a few minutes left, so because this is educational activity for us, so I guess I want to ask Midhul to share a little bit experience, like or even suggestions to the students here. So what motivates you to look into this problem? Because we all know that funding or defining a problem is like probably the most challenging part for graduate study, right? If you find a good problem, then you are already almost success, right? Because finding a solution is not that hard, right? Right. So what motivates you, and during your work on this project, now what's like the biggest lesson you learned? So so
yeah,
please.
so yeah, great question. I would love to share that. So the motivation for this project is actually a very interesting story. It's we did not sit down and think, okay, we want to work on this project of understanding the host network and execute it. It was definitely not like that. It was, we started with something very different, and the project evolved, and that is something I've experienced in my PhD, happened multiple times. You just start working on something, try to understand better, and then your project keeps evolving, and at the end the problem statement that you have is very different from what you started. So that's definitely one lesson. And so the way this started actually was that one of my colleagues, Saksham Agarwal, who's a professor at UIUC now, he was interning at Google, and he observed some of these problems there. And he came back to Cornell, and we were talking about it. So we used to sit side by side. And at that time, I was working on something very different. Like I was working on storage, like hardware offload for storage workloads. And so he talked about this problem, and then we came up with this idea of trying to, similar to what you were mentioning about, trying to bypass the memory interconnect to try to avoid this congestion.
Right.
So we started working on that kind of project, and then for that project we ran some motivation experiments to motivate the problem on our server, and these quadrants that you see were actually the motivation experiments for that project. And then we saw these results and we were like, wait, what is happening here? Sometimes the CPU throughput degrades, sometimes the peripheral throughput degrades. Why is this happening? And we tried looking at some architecture papers and to try and see, because we thought maybe there should be an answer there. So, but we didn't find an answer. And that's when my advisor Rachit actually, pushed us to say, let's try to understand it deeply first before, just going and trying to solve the problem. So we started trying to take individual data points in these graphs and do measurements and try to understand why this is happening. And that is basically how the project evolved. We thought, initially we'll spend 2 weeks on this and we'll get some understanding. Then we got a little bit of understanding, and then we were like, no, there are newer questions now to answer, and then it kept going. And I'd say it was not easy, and it took a long time. Like I think we started this like in late 2022, maybe fall 2022,
Okay.
and so almost like 2 years to completion, right? So, and there were also roadblocks. For example, initially in the first few months we made some progress on explaining the blue regime, and those things were explained, for example, and then we had no idea how to explain the red regime, and for many months, there was nothing, like we did not have any progress. And then I think one fine day, I was doing some measurements. I learned about the CHA, some internal nodes in the host network, and I was doing some measurements, and I had this hunch that some of the requests that we were recording were not being captured. So I did some, reverse engineering to try to like brute force over different possible request IDs to try to find if there is some hidden transaction that was not documented. And turns out there was. So I found like a request at the CHA that was not documented before. And after finding that and doing updated measurements of latencies, we found this insight that actually the explanation for the red regime was the fact that the writes had like different domain basically, and that they were able to be processed asynchronously. And that was like a eureka moment. Once we found that, everything made sense. Like we were able to explain everything, and everything fell into place. So, and that's what led to this domain by domain flow control idea, what eventually led to the final shape of this work. So yeah, I think it was like a very lots of ups and downs. The project evolved over time, and I would say my main lesson here is that sometimes as researchers, I think our goal is not necessarily just to go and try to solve problems, but building a better understanding of something is very useful, because sometimes when you understand something very deeply enough, the solution presents itself automatically, and you might also find many new directions for research based on this. So, for example, after this work, our group has many new research directions that many different students are now working on, thanks to this deep understanding, right? So, and I think it's also very fun. Like for me, when you're able to explain something really well, then it gives a lot of satisfaction, like intellectually. So I think that's yeah.
Yeah, I guess the key takeaway would be in the title, understanding, right? So it's really about not about like hey, this is let's find a big problem, solve it. It's more like before you find the problem, like you said, understanding how it works and what are all these anomaly or performance degradation, where do they come from, right? So by analyzing them, like you said, I would imagine like 2 years, it's really a long time, right? So I would imagine that there are lots of efforts and different types of experiment. I'm sure they are not covered in the paper, right? Because you only have 12 pages. Right. But essentially, understanding pays off, right? Essentially, if you I guess this is a very good suggestion or lesson for all the students here, no matter you are like undergraduate or graduate or PhD student, right? So basically, after I'm not saying that you should spend 2 years on every problem you work on, but this is a learning experience. It takes time, right? After you understand, after you have a good understanding of things, you can either say, hey, this is understanding itself is important, or based on the understanding, you can define new problems by yourself, right? So. Okay, yeah, that's very very helpful and very inspiring for at least to me, and I hope my students here. I don't know how many of them are here today, but I hope they can really digest this. Yes. Okay. Yes. Thank you so much, Midhul. I think we're already like 1 or 2 minutes over, so I guess let's thank Rulan and Midhul again for joining us on today's session. And also for the participants, before you leave, if you could just take a minute to fill out a very quick survey. I just put it in the chat channel. Basically, I'm just basically collecting some statistics for every meetings. So hopefully by next year's SIGCOMM in Portugal, I can in our community meetings, I can report the progress of basically what we have done in the past year about the paper reading. So please, if you have time, spend 1 or 2 minutes on this. And so thanks, Midhul and Rulan again. And I'm just clapping in motion, probably not committing the sound. And so we will adjourn here today. And after 2 weeks, we will also gather again to study the decentralized SDN paper from Google. And okay, thank you. Have a good day, good night, and good evening. Thank you. Thank you, Midhul.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. It's a lot of fun. Yeah. Thank you.